Yeah.
All right, so we're here again, but we've been here all along. Anyway, good morning. We started warming up with some thoughts. Anthony, continue on that vein that you were discussing.
Well, I didn't get my way, and that's really bugging me. Normally, for the last few months, I've been getting everything I want. I mean, just unbelievable. At one time, because I said I was too trying to get my way is what's mad. I really jumped on something and I didn't get my way. Now I just can't get it. I don't know how it's ever going to change feeling. And then I feel like I'm going to do it again, and I'm not going to get I'm going to say
that's a very accurate feeling you're having, that you're going to do it again.
Yeah.
It's guaranteed to happen again if you continue to make believe it's something happening to you rather than something being done by you. It's kind of like consistently picking up a drink or a drug and then wondering why you can't stop.
Yeah.
Right? It's the first one that gets us, not the second or the third or the fourth or the 100th. So to the point we were just discussing, as soon as I make believe the content of my thoughts, what I'm thinking about, which I choose, is real and true, I make believe I'm the creator of reality.
Also, too, I'm putting too much. It's a little minor thing, but I'm just making it into this huge thing. I haven't.
Well, think of that. Think of if you're the creator of reality and you're not actually the creator of reality, you would have to think some pretty big ideas about what you're thinking to even come close to the idea of an infinite reality. Think of this. You're trying to live up to a position you've taken that isn't true, that your thoughts are reality. What you're thinking about is reality, rather than simply something you're imagining. It's just a thought. Thoughts imagine things. They observe
things. And
things.
that's why this show is good, so to speak, because if I'm not, I was telling Jack that it's like I need to hear this, because if I'm doing something, my mind will start cooking this up, and I need just to hear somebody.
Your mind doesn't start cooking it up. You start cooking your mind with those thoughts you choose. Do you see how we want to have our mind independent? As though
you don't like
thinking.
So you don't like to cook, you're saying, Jack?
I like to admit when I'm doing it, so that I have the freedom of actually reckoning with it, rather than pretending it isn't happening and shouldn't be happening and that I have nothing to do with it.
It's like that feeling you left something burning on the stove.
Well, think of burning desires. Think of burning desires and things like that actually are metaphors for that concept. We're heating up over something. We're warming up over something. We want something because we think it'll satisfy us in a way that is so far beyond reality.
Yes.
Reality can't be far from us or away from us or more or less of what it is where we are now. It's all just a disconnect from actually reckoning in thinking with what's happening accurately.
And the funny thing is, probably the thing I'm mad about and I want, nobody else would even want here. It's like I'm so intense on getting something I want that really is no value.
I can guarantee you, Anthony, it is a tiny speck of dust that you are looking at so closely that it seems to be everything.
Yeah.
And all you've done is put your face to the ground and think all you can see is dirt.
Yeah.
And you wonder why the world just looks so dirty and why everything just seems to be so hopeless and helpless and all those things. It's just a choice. It's a choice, and it's a mistake, literally a mistake that creates misgivings. And to see the misgivings and start noticing them, rather than trying to figure out why you're doing all those crazy things, to simply admit that it's crazy to be doing those things at all, will help you start understanding that you don't need more stories to help justify it.
I was thinking, how could Jack relate to this feeling? And I'm like, it's like when you were building that beautiful stairway out of cement and nobody was there, right? Or it went more than it was supposed to. Just that feeling of a stairway that just can't be built.
Well, it was built, and it was just a function of doing what needed to be done to get it built.
But it was pretty upsetting along the way, right? It was upsetting.
Challenges are not always easy to face, especially when I've spent a lifetime crafting out ideas that are impossible and thinking somehow I'll get over them if I focus more on the impossibility.
And that was the other thing too. I told my friend, because I was struggling with something, and then I just said, I want to be a natural. I just wish I was. He goes, there is no such thing as name anybody that accomplished anything, and I guarantee you they did a lot of work towards it. And I was like, yeah, I guess you're right. No matter who it is, you have to work. And I just was upset at that part. I want to be a natural.
Well, I will suggest that reality is natural. It is our nature. Humanity is a function of reality. Thoughts are a function of reality. They are designed to express reality and truth, not to be the creators of it. To think that we're the creators of it because we think a thought we have is right, real, and true hits us in an experience as though reality is now against us, when in fact it's our own choice to make believe we're the creators of reality that's causing it. It's extremely, it's so simple that it's absurd to think of it simply, because it's embarrassing to think that we have been perpetuating this on a basis for decades, centuries, millennia, making believe that what we think is true and real rather than simply a thought, period. The content of thoughts are imagined. They're just choices we make in relation to what's happening. And my experience is, and I think to something that Lindsay said about the disruption and the trauma and all the stuff that's experienced, is that when I'm feeling those things are being created by my body language to tell me something's wrong. Just as somebody, if a crossing guard was at a crosswalk when I was 3 years old and I launched into the crosswalk, they might say, hey, stop, go back, wait, there's cars coming. That's what my body is doing. It's sending alarms and signals saying something's wrong here. So if I continue to think the thought is real, I want to think that I need to overcome the body language and the feelings I'm having, or I want to feel better about them. That my goal is to try to all of a sudden manipulate what's going on, and again, impose another thought on it rather than respect what's happening as an accurate assessment of what's happening. My body language is telling me I'm disturbed, I'm uncomfortable, I don't feel right, I feel unstable. Those are all evidentiary to the fact that I'm doing something that's unstable. I'm thinking something that is discomforting. I'm thinking something that has no basis other than my thinking. It's thinking about thinking itself. That isn't who I am. It's something I'm doing. It's a choice I'm making. To admit the choice is to begin to reckon with the responsibility for it, rather than claim I'm a victim and irresponsible and wonder why things keep getting worse. Morning, Gabe.
Morning, Gabe. Yeah, I feel better already. Just hearing a third person's opinion when I was too close to it. I need somebody to say it's not a big deal.
Well, that's a good observation. No, Anthony, it's a big deal if you keep doing it wrong, because you're going to go further wrong and you're going to impact everyone with the wrong you're doing, thinking you have nothing to do with what's wrong.
Yeah, my friend's sponsor used to tell him, Annie, it's not old behavior if you're still doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not old behavior if you're still doing it.
So talking about it, if we have been thinking these things are so shameful that we're guilty for and should be kept to ourself all the time, our seeming self, we're keeping it to, and then wondering why that self is constantly seeming to be out of control and doing things that aren't that healthy and aren't that productive and aren't that functional. You start to see the creation of it is coming out of we think we're the creators of reality and truth, but what we're creating is an experience that's so despicable and so unwantable and so dysfunctional that it's hard to admit we would ever bother to do this to our experience, not ourselves, because the self of thought thinking of itself isn't who we are. It's something we're doing.
Do this to the experience. I like that.
Yes. So it's just changing the language by changing the thinking about what we're doing. Rather than say I'm thinking to myself and I'm thinking about myself, what I've learned is that I'm actually thinking to my thoughts and I'm thinking about my thoughts, period. Yeah. That isn't me.
And I like the way I don't have to say exactly I never said what my problem is, because that's not important. It's just that there's a problem.
Well, to begin with, admitting the problem and having a relationship to the entire problem is very simple by saying it's a problem. The revelation of having a relationship to it is that you will start seeing much more than you can ever see when you deny the problem, because you'll be fighting the problem rather than having a relationship to it where you can begin to embrace the problem. It's kind of like having a relationship with a person.
Yeah.
If you decide to fight them all the time, you're probably not going to see anything better than their fight.
Right.
And you're going to think of them as contemptible and horrible and reprehensible for doing what they're doing when we're the ones consistently creating the reaction that we're getting. So if you embrace somebody or something, you begin to actually share what we already share and align with how things actually are. We're never alone. We're always united. We are always one. To think of ourselves in bits and pieces is to think of ourselves as apart from everything. That's a very desolate thought to have. And it isn't to suggest we can't have that thought, but when we're having that thought, feeling abandoned, disconnected, and lonely is the natural basis of our experience, because we're experiencing the thought, not reality, the thought we're having about reality that's wrong. So to feel lonely is an indication, if we're absolutely always connected and interconnected, to feel lonely is an indication something is wrong with our thinking. Doesn't mean we can't feel what we're feeling. It means we're feeling what we're thinking. We're feeling based on what we're thinking. We're feeling our thoughts. Our feelings are a chance to actually gain some perspective in what we're doing when we don't think we have any perspective. Feelings are actually offering us some latitude, some perspective in it. If we respect them for what they're doing, you will also notice that when I have feelings, they always come with words. I feel bad, I feel uncomfortable. Those are all now thoughts. The intimacy and interaction of thoughts and feelings are immediate. There's, I think Lenzi said before, that there's a sense of knowing that goes beyond the thinking. Because thinking something a brain does, but all of our senses in our body, our organs, everything has cellular structure that has a sense of knowing, or it wouldn't be doing what it's doing so perfectly to be doing everything it's doing for us to even have this experience right now. There's a brilliance, literally an enlightened brilliance that is naturally happening that we undermine by making believe the thinking we're doing about what's happening is in fact reality, rather than simply having a thought. And to notice the disturbance as a guidance system, sort of like a GPS where it says you missed the turn, make a U-turn. It doesn't argue with you. It just says make a U-turn. It's telling you if you want to be on track, you might want to go back. If you don't, we can find another route, and I'll just keep adjusting as you go.
Funny thing is, in today's news blurb in Santa Cruz, it said map causes driver to drive off a bridge. You know, these navigational maps. So you got to be careful a little bit. Do you like this?
Now, let's think about that, though. If the guy sees the bridge is ending and he's paying attention to the map, isn't that kind of like paying attention to our thoughts, thinking they're true, and saying, oh, the bridge can't possibly be ending here?
Perfect. I love how you did that. Perfect. Do you like this saying, Jack? The laws of nature are but the mathematical thoughts of God.
Well, their nature is natural enough not to be thinking of itself, but acting on behalf of what it knows. It's a very different state of being, but it's also our state of being because we're beings. We have a spiritual nature that is not bound in time and space, that is absolutely, what would an infinite source have to give but an infinite reality? Not something that comes in bits and pieces, not something that can come apart, not something that's in conflict, but something that's inherently integrated, which is what integration is. People talk about integrity as being honesty. Well, if we're willing to be honest, we're starting to notice that everything is integrated. It's all integrated. Our human experience is part of all of that. It isn't the creator of all of it, it's part of it all. And it's not apart from any of it. We each are occupying space in bodies that we have been given responsibility over. And to think of our job as being the creators of reality is to undermine the entirety of our responsibility, when in fact the responsibility doesn't change, only the effects we create with the body we've been given change. We create anxiety, we create stress, we create disease as a result of the disequilibrium, in the imbalance, the discomfort. Those are all impositions of our own demands that what we're thinking is correct, and our addictive reaction to the reaction to the reaction, the chain reaction that we create that creates a critical mass that literally, think about tumors. They're masses. We're creating critical mass in our thinking, and it's going to manifest somewhere, because every thought we have is manifest in some form of function within the universe. We're interacting with what's going on intimately all the time, spontaneously, synchronicitously. Now,
So how do you move on? Let's say, okay, I screwed something up. I'm worried I'm going to do that again. It's probably going to happen again. I don't want to think about it anymore.
let me focus on Gabe a little bit, because we've been
Okay.
talking about this.
Yeah.
And we took a walk yesterday, and I think Gabe was, sort of prodding at some of those things, if I remember correctly, Gabe.
What do you want to know, Chad? Where should we start?
Well, Anthony's asking, where do what's different in this conversation is there's nothing I can say that anyone ever has to listen to. There's nothing I can say that's true enough to overcome your own inclination to think what you want, ever. So if you're thinking what you're thinking is true, you're going to hear what I'm saying is what you think I'm saying to support the thinking you're doing, not listen to what is actually being said. And I'm not saying you should listen to what's actually being said. I'm simply suggesting you can hear what's being said despite what you're thinking, when you start noticing how your thinking can seem to supersede and overwhelm and want to dominate what else is going on because of the defensive nature of reactive thoughts, which is, by the way, part of what Dianetics was all about.
Yeah, we talked
Gabe,
about...
I think you were talking about...
Go ahead.
I mean, I'll let you continue or go if you can recapture some of the aspects yesterday, because you were really talking about existentialism and the sort of essence of essence and the...
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading those two books by Jean-Paul Sartre and Heidegger, but also had for the rest of the group and the listeners is my mom was in surgery last week and wasn't coming out. She's fine. She's great. She's 100%, but there were some touch and go moments of her incision not healing very well. And so we were going back and forth with that. That was somewhat stressful. And then my uncle, as I noted in the text, passed away after a 2-year battle with cancer. So that was, we all knew it was coming, but it was still hard, and to be with the family and to experience all those things. But what we were talking about yesterday was, I think you already mentioned it today, Jack, is that the existence of the universe and infinity, encompasses everything, even the creator, if you want to give it that moniker. It's all part of the same thing. We can't be outside of something that we're inherently a part of.
Yeah.
You can't keep adding. You can, you're going to get the same answer. Infinity plus infinity times infinity. You're still going to get, everything that already is. And the existence of it is inherent in you and is part of, your ability to actually comprehend it. You can't, well, the way Sartre talked about it was consciousness. The conscious being can only understand consciousness. You have to be as part of consciousness to sort of talk about consciousness and even debate it, that you're in it in reference to what, we're talking about with Jimmy and all that stuff is, and I do it to a certain degree, is trying to fight to make a point when there is no point to make.
But that's a point.
Yeah. I enjoy the fight a little bit, but
that's a point, though.
Yeah.
To try to make an impossible point is to create what seems like a black hole where everything else gets sucked down it and disappears. And, you take your experience to be with everyone else, what you're thinking, rather than what they're doing. So you have no relation with them that's meaningful, because you basically obliterated them and turned them into effectively radiation. And that's why I think we suspect other people are toxic. We say it, but we don't notice that we're actually the creator of that radiation by making believe that we can suck everything out of them into this sort of void that we're creating by trying to make the point that what we're thinking is right and real and what they're thinking must not be them. And that's a conflict. That's a major human dilemma that's been going on for a long enough time to at least put some words to it and think of it in terms that aren't religious, and they aren't secular, and they aren't political, and they're just simply statements of fact about how we tend to operate and how we have operated historically. There is evidence to that. But it isn't the history that we're trying to overcome, but the present nature of noticing that there is no history in the present, there is no past, there is no future. It's just an absolute. To your point about multiplying the infinite by the infinite, the interesting thing within the infinite realm is that in the human relative seeming realm, the opposite of something isn't the same as the thing. It's the opposite. In the infinite, the opposite of the infinite is infinite. And the opposite of everything is everything. And the opposite of nothing is nothing. It's just all the same because it doesn't vary. How we can see that when it comes to understanding what you were pointing out in terms of Sartre's conversation. My sense is philosophers have largely thought of conversation as what we think of in our brain, or consciousness is what we think of in a brain and limited to the brain, rather than a greater spiritual awareness that there is an absolute knowing mind that is nature, that is that infinite source, that isn't something that we could be exceptions to. If we are absolutely aware of it in any way, we must be aware of it in all ways. And to think otherwise is simply a limitation of thought that we're imposing on our experience, not forced to do, but choosing freely. And to feel condemned by what we're choosing freely and then think we have nothing to do with it only furthers the condemnation and the claim that we have dominion, that we are the ones in charge, that is up to me, when all I'm ever in charge of in that regard is misery and discontent and irritability and restlessness and discomfort and disturbing consequences.
Let's talk about the two examples we used yesterday quickly. Is, since Aristotle and Plato, 7,000 years ago or however long it is, they're having essentially the same conversations we're having today about all of this, about who we are, what we are. For 7,000 years, we've been trying to do this as humans. But also, as we noted the example of the black hole, that it's something that sucks everything in, doesn't let everything out, holds, and then craps out bad stuff. Like it's a, I know
the radiation that returns may not be bad stuff. It may be the roots, maybe the elementary roots of what turns into the planets, the matter, the things that actually give us a space to operate on as humans.
Yeah. So like there's this birth, living and dying of a black hole, as well as the sun and a galaxy. And we're all part of the cycle. And, it's a human, we attribute a human characteristic to it, but it is what is already part of the knowing nature you're talking about.
So part of the understanding is to see if the absolute is absolute, if the infinite is infinite and it's everywhere, and it isn't everywhere to itself because there is nowhere in itself, since it isn't a spatially time-based dimension. But to our experience as humans, which I would say is what we're talking about, because language for humans has been sort of a bridging potential to build bridges to connect with each other so that understanding can become prevalent amongst us by actually understanding rather than misunderstanding. What has been often prevalent amongst humans is misunderstanding that leads to fights and things that we make believe are inevitable, when in fact it's a proposition we're pursuing to make believe what we think is right when it's wrong. To deny the body's anxiety as something that shouldn't be happening is to deny the information it's giving us that we are creating anxiety as an example of noticing that we know something's wrong to have that anxiety. We're aware of it. And to say we don't think we're doing what we're doing is to think that thinking, again, is the dominant source because we think it's reality. We think what we think is real rather than just simply what we think. So within the absolute nature of, say, relativity, if relativity is a subset, seemingly, of an absolute source, there must be a way to look at the absolute within the realm of what we see as being divided and divisible, the relative experience we're having, where everything is interacting with everything. And if you think of positions we take, let's say we take a position we think is good, that position is either opposing what's bad by thinking it's the only position to be taken because it's the right one, because it's the real one, because it's the only one. But in fact, if we're opposing what's bad, we are also uniting with what's bad. We are also connecting with what's bad. We are also recognizing with what's bad. We are admitting that that continuum is not divisible at all. So the positions we take actually confirm all the other positions that can be taken, rather than continue to perpetuate the idea that nobody should be taking any other position than we're taking. And if they do, we should be killing them to be free. Think of that conclusion. It must be we think the positions we take are real and are the only truth. To think that denying someone else the experience they're having in life would be the outcome and the only outcome. And that's largely what war is based on, a thought, collection of thought. Somebody doesn't think like us, we got to kill them. It isn't because we think we have to kill them that we dominate them. It's because the thoughts we have about them are wrong. They are weak. They are vulnerable. They are insecure. They are filled with doubt and uncertainty.
And that's Jana's co-conspirator theory, where you have to have friends that just agree with what you're saying.
Well, you already have friends. You're just now using them as a posse of people to justify that you're not doing it without them. So you have them to blame when it finally comes to the day of reckoning, and saying, like people do during riots, they say, well, everybody else was doing it and I just went along with it. It doesn't discount our culpability for our involvement, but we will use every method possible. Since insanity is insane, we will use every possible chance to make believe that we are irresponsible, which is actually arguing for non-existence, which is a suicidal tendency. It's suicidal thoughts.
And here's the key. You said every way possible. You got to put and impossible. That's the problem.
If you're just every way possible, and insanity is impossible. That's the whole point. Sick thoughts have, like addiction, has everything go backward. We think in addiction, the one thing we should never do is the only thing to do. Think of that. That's a collision. There's a conflict there. If we're thinking about reality as reality, there's no conflict in that. We're just beginning to contemplate that reality is real, that what's real is reality, period. There's a summation there that serves the absolute nature of it, because there's no definitive difference. We're not creating a description now. Well, what is reality? We've been going off on that conversation through human history, trying to define it. Thousands and thousands and thousands of books have been written to try to explain it, when it's explained by our existence. It's happening now. It's what's real must be real enough for us to be happening and even considering what isn't real.
It's like trying to define the wet in water.
Or thinking that the definition or the lack of definition would keep you dry if you dove in. We get wet when we dive into water, whether we think we understand it or not. We never understood water before people got wet. But we think when it comes to thinking, we have to come up with this definitive, arguable conclusion. We have to state our case. So we have a head case, working constantly on trying to resolve what's already resolved based on that was part of what we got into yesterday too, Gabe, was this idea that if we're even thinking about it, to one of Anthony's sort of ahas moments, if we're even thinking about, we can't think about it if we don't exist. So to think about existence and needing to define it, the fact that we can even think about it is the definition of it.
Right. Yeah.
So rather than try to make the point that we need to fight over whether we exist or how we should exist or whether other people should or shouldn't exist, the fact that we're existing is based on the chance to even notice that. It's kind of like thinking about death. You can't think about death if you're not alive. So you're never thinking about death. You're thinking about your thoughts that are alive, thinking about death. So to think about reality as being only what we think is sort of the reversal of that concept. If all we're ever thinking about is what we think when we're alive about death, we're not thinking about death. We're thinking about our thoughts about death. That doesn't mean we're thinking about death. It means we're thinking about our thoughts as thoughts about death and reality.
And not even in the correct way is everything that we're thinking.
But think of this, Anthony. If we're thinking about death as an end, we're admitting the thought we're having has an end. It doesn't have a beginning because it has no basis in reality.
To be or not to be?
Well, that apparently is still the question. But The answer is, as Shakespeare went on to describe in that poem, that we're all made cowards by the doubt we have about whether or not there is something more to be aware of or admit than the limitations of our thinking. Because the limitations of our thinking lead to the idea that if we get rid of the body, we'll stop thinking. That sort of suggests that there's no knowing beyond the thinking of the body. Again, it makes this point that thinking is the sum total of reality. It's a product of reality, just like corn is a product of reality.
To sleep, to dream.
Well, that's the whole point. He says to dream, perchance to dream, makes cowards of us all, because we start imagining maybe there's something more than what I'm thinking right now. I must be insane to think that my thinking is so real as to be reliable when I'm actually standing in the face of my own doubt and not admitting it, wanting to overcome that doubt and think that overcoming it is going to solve it, when overcoming it actually just perpetuates it. We're dealing with suicide at an all-time high right now, addiction at an all-time high. These are not These are not coincidences. They're consequences of thinking that has not been looked at accurately. So people are suffering emotionally and mentally. And the best thing they can do is to try to figure out how to escape it. When in fact, the difference with, if you rob a bank, you get away from the bank. You might get away with the money. When you're insane, to get away with it is to take whatever the insanity is you're creating with you wherever you go. There's no escape, because it's starting in your brain. It's starting where the body goes. It's always with the body where the body is. So to think we can get away from it is to miss the point of what's happening again. So there's a perversion in this, in insanity, to make believe that what's not happening is all that's happening. And it is not. We do not need to be completely incapable of running our lives and having a job and paying our bills and doing a lot of functional things to seem sane while considering things that are absolutely insane. And I would say collectively, we've done a good job of that, because we've written a lot of people off as being sane because they don't act insane and they don't look insane and they don't do the things that the worst people do. But we don't have to be the worst people to be doing something that isn't the best we can do.
And I think I put my finger on why I'm so upset at myself, is because even though I was mad at this other person for not giving me what I wanted, I never let them know. It was all through text. I never let them know I was really mad. And I even said, thank you. And I didn't say, I'm sorry. That's the reason I'm still feeling this way, because it's really
why
my
you're
fault.
Sorry, Anthony, is because you think there's a self that you have that you need to make up for.
Good. It feels good to say, hey, as I used to take 50% of the problem, and you go, no, it's 100%. Anything that's going on is 100% you. So I
know you can come up with versions of this to talk about feeling better about it, but I'm mentioning to you that the idea that you have a self that you're serving to feel better, you need to apologize to yourself. You don't have a self other than thoughts thinking of themselves. That's what you have.
I apologize to myself, but not the other person.
I think exactly. Yeah. Anthony, you listen to me?
Hello?
You're going to listen to me? You're going to listen now? You're going to listen now, or you're going to tell me?
I want to listen.
Okay. So if you think you have a self, who are you?
It's like that. Who's on first?
No.
Exactly.
Think of it. Your self is thinking of itself. This is the whole point of the mental obsession. The idea that thinking of itself creates a self gives us the impression that the more obsessively we think, the more sick thoughts we think, the better off we're going to be. If you're saying sorry to yourself, I am telling you now, you are sorry for the self you think you're making and creating now. It's not about the other person. It's not about the thing not happening. It's about what you're doing now with what you're thinking that's causing the sorrow, because you are missing the potential, to be honest, to express truth, to suggest that what you're actually doing is thinking about thoughts. Thinking of thinking itself does not create you. It does not make a self other than more thoughts. Thinking about thinking creates more thoughts. That's what obsessive thinking is. So if obsessive thinking is insanity, because it's based on the idea that the more I think about my thinking, the better off I get, I think who I am is the self of thought.
Yeah. And
that's not who I am.
And just to show you, like when I'm in this pain of not getting my way, I remember now thinking, God, I wonder what I'm going to do for Christmas. I wonder if what I'm going to get. Like all of a sudden, I'm like, that was random. What's Christmas going to be like?
Anthony, it's totally random to begin with. It's chaotic. It's a
Yeah,
mess. It's never going to be in order because there is no order to it, but the constant imagination that the more thoughts you come up with, which you
yeah.
often do in these conversations to help explain all the variations you're doing, as though if you explain all those variations, somehow it's going to be sane, when the explanation of them is an extension of the same insanity that's creating the discomfort and the
Yeah,
dis-ease
well,
and
I never said sane.
the sense of sorrow.
I didn't say ever be sane. I just said to try to figure it out. Like there's no conclusions are usually.
There is a
But
conclusion.
it was
There
interesting to
is a
watch.
conclusion. The conclusion is conclusive to admit you're starting it, you're starting it, you're starting it, you're starting it, and wondering why it doesn't stop.
Uh-huh.
That's the conclusion. The conclusion is conclusive, meaning
And not just
if it
starting
is.
it on that. It was really interesting to just be watching because I wasn't that into the pain. I was still watching the pain. And then it was like, well, what are you going to do for Christmas? It was
So
like,
think of that though, Anthony. You're
it was
starting
so random.
you are starting to admit that you are the watcher of those thoughts, so you can
Yeah.
be those thoughts. Those thoughts are something you're having. You can't be what you have. You can't become lasagna because you have it for dinner.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. I feel like lasagna after that sometimes.
Well, there's an element. I mean, think of that. We eat, converts all that stuff into calories, it converts it
Yeah.
into energy, it fuels our body. So there's a conversion there. But to think of it as becoming lasagna, as though the lasagna is still sitting in your stomach like it was sitting on the plate when you started, is a little bit of a stretch and would seem silly. But it's exactly what we're doing with all those little bits and pieces of stories that we constantly come up with to try to explain to
Yeah.
everybody why we're insane, when to listen to that and think to make any sense of it would make any sense is insane.
Yeah.
So I'm only pointing to you that you are observing and starting to speak in those terms, your thoughts. And to do that suggests that who you are is that observer. It's not the thinking you're doing. We've always been watching our thoughts because we've always been aware of what we're doing. And we have made believe through all these stories we've told that what we are is what we think. And all of a sudden, we're telling more and more and more stories about what we think so we can think more and more about it as though it's a life vest. And we're going to resuscitate this thing that has no life by continually thinking about it when it sucks the air out of our experience in our body.
Yeah. And I guess it's neat to watch it in that third window point of view, where you see the whole stage. You see the set.
Well, you're not as serious about it, certainly, because you see that it's just something happening. It's not something you are. It's just something. And
that's kind of the weird part. That's the weird part. There is the rub. It's like you realize it's nothing. It's just so superficial, but it's still there. You're like, God, that is just terrible.
Well, it's only there because you're imagining it's only there. That's it. As long as you continue to imagine it, you're going to see it. And as long as you think it's true, you're going to think
I was just going to say it's not imagining. It's really there. It feels
exactly.
It's there.
Think of that, Anthony. Think of that, Anthony. It's an addiction. It's a chronic reaction to a react. You know what repulses a body and a brain more than anything? Are lies. You know why? Because they have no applicable purpose whatsoever. No matter what we imagine we're saving ourselves from, all they are is corrosive, like acid.
Bad code. It's wrong code. Bad code.
Exactly. It's bad it's garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, just get rid of that.
And it's repulsive to our instinct because our instinct is about survival, and not only survival, but thriving. Not just surviving and just barely existing. It's about thriving. It's about making and doing and producing much more than we need. So we always have more to give than we ever want.
And the problem is I don't eliminate that bad code. I'm like, well, I've been running that code for so long. What the hell?
Anthony, it doesn't exist to be eliminated. When you start looking at it honestly, you'll start to see all it is
your present thought. That bad code is there.
It's your present thought constantly making believe that thing exists. It doesn't.
There is no code there. You're looking for the code, and they're like, there is no bad.
Exactly. This is why self-help is talking about helping a self that doesn't exist anymore.
And the looking for the code is talking about it, I guess. Where you're looking for the bad code is like, let me tell you where this went wrong and this. So you're trying to find this bad code, and
you're trying to reinforce there's a bad code to talk about as though it exists because you're thinking it's real. Just get this. The fundamental breach is making believe thoughts are reality and truth when they're just simply what we've chosen to think about.
Yeah. Wow.
Thinking about the content of discontent is an admission that there's no content in the thoughts. If you paid for Netflix and went and there was no content, there would be no point to have Netflix.
It's a show about nothing.
So settle into this a little bit while we talk about it, because I'm talking not only to you, Anthony, but there's other people listening who may be struggling with this, that it may be worth hearing some of the elementary aspects.
Yeah, but when things get too serious, I got to lighten it up with a little humor to take it off of it.
Well, listen, I have that history too. I do. I was the class clown, the winning class clown through 10th grade all the time. All the time. I thought it was all funny. I thought I could evade it by making jokes about it, but it actually eventually occurred to me that the reason I was doing that was because I didn't think it was funny.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to handle the seriousness of the nature I'd created and the seriousness of the predicament that I felt like I was in. And so I tried to laugh my way out of it, but that's another form of denial. It's just another way of perpetuating. You know what denial does? Denies we're denying. Like lies deny their lies. That's how a lie is maintained. Deny that it's a lie. Think of it as true. Think of it as something that's going to give you a benefit. The promise of a lie is that it's going to lie. To think that there's some benefit we're going to get from doing it is to think that the promise is something other than what it is, a lie. Now, I'm not talking about just the lies we keep from other people or the things we say that we didn't do that we did. I'm talking even more intimately to our own experience when we start entertaining thoughts that aren't true and think they're true. Those two are lies. We think of these things not as deliberate, but as something that just seems to happen to us. But when we start operating on the basis of the discontent and the irritability and the restlessness and the disturbance and the anxiety and the stress and the depression and think of it as something to get over, we're trying to give credit to the thing we've created that's wrong to believe in it is right. We're continuing to reinforce the story about it, which continues to maintain it, not because it has any life, but because we keep insisting on thinking about it that way to get over the problem. How can you possibly get over a problem you continue to create? It's exactly why resistance leads to persistence.
And as Janet describes it as touching when your tooth is a little sore or something, and you keep touching it to see where the pain exactly is. I think that's the reason I like to relive. Like, where did I go? I'll start touching parts of it.
Anthony, you're trying to make sanity out of insanity right now. You're trying to come up with the reason why you're insane. Let me just explain it to you. It's because it's insane that you want to keep coming up with reasons. You know why? It maintains the insanity. That's exactly what obsessive thinking does. It's exactly what reactivity does in thinking.
Yeah.
There is no reactivity in knowing. There are no victims in absolute nature. There is no irresponsibility. Those are all self-concocted, self-inflicted, self-induced, self-imposed experiences that we're creating in what we think is a self that has no basis other than our thoughts. None.
But why do we do that? Like, have you done that with your tooth or something's hurting, and then instead of just leaving it alone, you're like, I want to know where. Like, exactly. You just want to really touch the pain to see.
I wasn't talking about teeth.
Well, anything. I just mean a sore. Anything that's
because you think pain is real. You think pain confirms reality. So we create more pain to make believe it's real. It isn't real. It's self-induced to give us the experience that it's real. And we're doing it because it's insane. Think about a dream that seems like a nightmare. It isn't happening, but the experience is that something's happening that's seriously wrong, seriously frightening, seriously something we need to get away from. This isn't really happening, and it's an experience created out of imagination. So if we can create those experiences when we're sleeping, we are perfectly capable of creating them while we're awake. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about beginning to notice that considering ideas that seem absurd and preposterous and ridiculous and too simple to be true may be worth considering as a contemplative, awakened state of meditation. And just start saying, I don't have any obligation to fight any thought, anything at any time. And whenever I think there's something to fight, I think there's something to fight. When in fact, it's only my thinking that I think I need to resist rather than notice if I'm doing it. Why would I immediately choose to think I shouldn't be doing it? Or I'm not doing it? and as a result, think it's the only thing I can do. How is it possible that I can say I shouldn't be doing it, I'm not doing it, and then think it's the only thing to do? Think of the conflict, the insanity of that. It's exactly what perpetuates addiction, because the root of addiction is mental. Lensis, it looked to me like you were on the verge of several thoughts.
Yes, I have so many things. For example, I can notice two things. Number one, when thought came from nowhere and we don't understand why I'm thinking this way, or because we are a human being who live by experiences. We experience a lot of things, and some memories came from our brain and make us to think. But I can see two different things. What we think without, I don't know, sometimes some thought came and I told myself, this is not me thinking. This is wrong. But sometimes, because I had some experience, that they came to my brain, and sometimes I don't know why this person acts that way. What this happened to me when I was a little girl. So I need to understand why, because those thoughts bring pain or discomfort or anxiety. And so we need to understand which one came from reality. And
do you know how long humans have been looking to try to find that answer? As long as humans have been seeking, they've been looking for that answer. You know why? Because the question is why? Why? You know what the answer is? Why? It's a intentional evasion of the fact that you say you don't understand why it's happening, but you're aware that it's happening, aren't you? Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we start with that it's happening, it isn't a question. So it isn't in question. So we have concluded
is the question.
We have concluded the stability of what is happening isn't a question anymore. It's that it's happening that is the relationship, the immediate relationship. If there's any hope of understanding your memories, which the brain is capable of maintaining, but keep in mind, the memory is never remembered at any other time than the present, right? So it's only in the present. It's only what you're doing with what you remember. Memory is very useful. Mm-hmm. As if you've made a mistake in the past, you can say, "Oh, I've done this before. I know it's not going to work." So mm-hmm. But it's always happening in the present, and starting to come to terms with that begins to again transfers from what is happening, why it's happening, how is this happening, what is happening, when is it going to end? All these questions. We're like reporters trying to come up with a story that people are going to be interested in, and I can assure you, most of the stories we tell are really boring to people, which is why they don't listen to us at all. They're just waiting for us to stop. Just stop telling me the story. Let's just say hello. How are you? What's going on? Even how are you? It's another question. It just that you are is not in question. That you're thinking as you're thinking it is not in question. Hmm. The point is, if you have a relationship to what's happening as it is happening, which you already have, and you begin to admit it in your thinking now is not interminably preoccupied with trying to answer a question it can't answer, because it's now actually relating. You're allowing it, you're asking it to, it's like getting on the horse and holding the reins and squeezing the belly. The horse is going to move. It knows that that's the signal to move forward. And whoa is the signal to stop if you pull the reins back. You're giving your thoughts a chance to begin to operate on a functional basis, because you're not asking it why as though it knows and you don't. You're simply conceding that this is happening. Oh, this is happening. Now, you say you don't know where the thoughts come from. I will tell you, you know exactly where they're coming from. Because to have them is an indication that your awareness is much greater than the ideas you have about the things you think you don't have. For them to be occurring must mean that you have an awareness that's much greater than that has been either dissected or diminished, a diminished capacity in relation to your own thinking by not allowing things to be as they are. Your relationship to them has always been elusive, has always been mysterious, has always been superstitious, mythological, and thought all these other confluence of things were happening to you rather than seeing it as an experience you're creating by you. That transition is seeing that responsibility isn't a negotiable option for us. It's the nature of our existence. If the infinite is responsible for all existence and we are part of that existence, we are naturally responsible by nature, period. It isn't an option. It's not. Truth and reality are not options. It's starting to see that these things we're talking about are so elementary and so fundamental that to simply consider them as they are begins to actually eliminate the stories we tell. They start to disappear because you realize, what's the point? I'm starting off in this direction again to try to figure out something that I must already know, but just don't think I do. So again, to think I don't know what I know is to think thinking is the dominant source rather than say, no, I just keep asking thinking to do what it can't do because it isn't reality. I already know what reality is. I am a function of reality. My thinking is something that's a function of my brain and my body that I've been given to be responsible for. It's irresponsible of me to use it in ways that are irresponsible. But it doesn't make me irresponsible. It doesn't make you irresponsible. It makes what we're thinking irresponsible because it's what we're choosing that's irresponsible. That's very different than thinking I become responsible like we normally do, because when we think we're what we think when we're irresponsible in our thinking that we become irresponsible. It's not true. It would violate the whole precept of reality and truth and infinite and all that to think that thinking would be greater than them in any way. And violate our responsibility. If absolute nature is absolute, it's absolutely our nature, period. Anthony, back to your point earlier. So to live as though reality isn't reality, you can't have any greater trauma because you immediately think you don't belong where you are. You think you need to be somewhere else that you can never seem to get to. You need to have something else that you never seem to get enough of, or have to get rid of something that you never seem capable of getting rid of, become completely dependent on what other people think, how you appear, what they think about you becomes either has exposed you as a fraud or is aligned with you. So now, to Jana's point, they become your conspirator. So now you're in a conspiracy of differences, literally. Good book written on that.
An hour into the show and you're nailing me perfectly. It's like I didn't even know this.
So the difference in our conversation that we're looking at isn't a difference at all. It's beginning to admit that we have an absolute knowing nature that has never been disrupted. And we've been so invested in our thinking because it is something that we have that seems unique again amongst the species, at least on this planet, that we can actually think about our thinking. Most animals
and you have to think. And you have to think, I was going to say, and you can't just go, oh, I'm never going to think again.
Well, you can say that, but your thinking is going to continue to think because it's the nature of what a brain does. Thinking, your brain's thinking 24 hours a day. This is not about not thinking. It's about seeing that when we're thinking sick thoughts, we are going to act in sick ways, and we are going to create disease that impairs our ability to function on behalf of others as part of a unified whole. We become a drag on the system, literally. We become an embarrassment to our own experience because we're doing everything we can to justify that we don't have any part in it all, when in fact we're playing a bigger part of hurting it all. It's not sane.
Jack?
Yes.
For those thoughts that came from nowhere, they are fantasies. So we have a power to say, I refuse to have this thought because it's nothing about my values, morals, and I refuse to have those crazy thoughts. And
they're only crazy once you think they're real. When they're fantasies, they're actually what thoughts are designed to do. Imagination is what thoughts are designed to do. If we didn't imagine, we wouldn't have gone to the moon. We wouldn't be doing what we're doing. Now, the problem is that a lot of what we're doing looks like it's really brilliant, but we deny the consequences in the long run. We start to deny that they have any bad consequence because we want to continue to live in the fantasy that they're true and real. We don't want to live in the consequence of the effect that we're causing that's no good. So a lot of the things that we think we're doing, it's like in your own life, when you think you need to be only doing one thing and you start doing that one thing and that one thing pays off a little bit. And now you're invested in that one thing and you're getting some feedback that it's okay, but you're actually starving yourself from the totality of your experience because you're subjecting yourself to an impossibility that's you're eventually going to hit that wall. Which is why why would New Year's resolutions continue to be redone every New Year's if people were resolving things in any prior year? It wouldn't happen.
Because it's a good place to start again,
you're constantly resolving because the solutions we create are not solutions. They're Band-Aids. They're an attempt to feel better. They're an attempt to overcome rather than to begin to concede. If I have a greater sense of knowing, that knowing would guide me to a solution that the only reason I need guidance from is because I think I'm somewhere else doing something else with someone else at some other time and place. And the guidance is actually saying, wait a minute, it's all here now. There is nothing else. Those thoughts that seem to come from nowhere, by the way, have no basis in reality, which is we're just making them up. What do we call that? Our makeup. We call it our makeup. We talk about making our minds up, and we miss the fact that it's made up. We're saying it out loud.
And Jack talks about the fact that motivational speakers, they're overcoming. So a lot of these things are based on overcoming the thought, never thinking that's because I'll come up with ways like, Jack, I found a way to always think positive thoughts. And he said, it's not about that. It's not even having to go there, not even to start.
Well,
I think, right?
Positive thoughts are an admission that you have a lot of negative thoughts.
Right. Yeah.
So if you have thoughts that are negating the positivity, how much more, if your negative thought is going to grow to the point that your positive thoughts grow, you've created a new impossibility that's going to be just drive you crazy, literally. And we don't need to be driven there because it's where we are. It's not, we don't need to hop in a car to get there. We're here now.
So Jack,
Yeah.
We have power to control our brain.
Well, it's happening whether we control it or not. What we do with it are the choices we make. What we choose to do with it are the choices we make. So think of sleeping. You're not really thinking about what you're thinking, but your thinking's monitoring all of your sensations and probably monitoring a lot of the craziness that you think you're keeping down during the day that starts to bubble up. And we think a nightmare is some strange confluence when in fact it's revealing this stuff we don't think we're doing, the seeming subconscious that isn't we talk about subconscious openly as being something we don't know, but how could we talk about it openly if we didn't know it? Mm-hmm. We know what's going on. We just don't want to admit it. We don't want to talk about it. We think that by denying it, it's going to stay in the dark and nobody's going to notice it, but it's written on our face. We wear it in our sleeve. It's heavy on our hearts. All these terms we use describe it. Our lower backs go out trying to wear the weight of this head that's so filled with matter and mass. And it's all made up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So self-help and the whole industry is trying to help a self that doesn't exist except for thoughts thinking of themselves. Thoughts thinking of themselves don't have any volition on their own. It's what we do to guide them that we've been given dominion over. That's what our charge is. That's what our human experience is. We've been given bodies where what we choose to do is not something anybody else can do for us. Mm-hmm. And that's why in this conversation, it's what everyone does with what they hear, not what they hear, that makes the difference in their experience. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times, we've been doing this for a couple of years now, it seems to be repetitive, but it's a reinforcement of something that already exists that the repetition is, rather than the reinforcement of things that don't exist, making believe they're permanent and true because we're constantly hammering down the nail. So one of the experiences that I had, and a lot of people have had that I've worked with, Gabe included, and Anthony, and one of the experiences that all of a sudden, as I stopped being so busy, preoccupied with all the thinking I'm doing about the things not happening, I start noticing that there's a lot happening in my experience that is very disturbing. Mm-hmm. And I start realizing that these things I've been doing while I've been making believe they weren't even happening. And it becomes pretty obvious why I'm feeling present traumatic stress and why I'm feeling that everyone else is to blame. And I seem to have this incredible clarity of what's wrong in the world while I'm not even conceding what's wrong in my own thinking, my own functional capacity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the heartache, the tension, the stress, the anxiety, they're all signs, like on a dashboard, lights flashing that you're out of oil. Don't keep driving. It's giving you good information. If we deny it, we're going to wreck the machine.
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing that today. It's happening socially. If it's happening socially, we're all part of that happening.
And usually by the time the lights are on, it's too late though, right?
Well, if they're working properly, they should give you some notice.
So it's very important to notice, to be aware about what I'm thinking, where those thoughts are coming from,
No,
right?
don't worry about where they're coming from. Just begin to notice. If everything that's happening is happening in the present, just begin to notice they're happening. It doesn't mean they're real, and it doesn't mean they're true. And you'll start actually noticing that you've been observing. You've always known you were observing them, but you get confused and making believe when you think they're true that you're in them. And you have no perspective. So what is no perspective? You begin to think that all you know is what you think. So when you think you don't know what's going on, you say, I don't know what's happening, when in fact it's just what you're thinking because it's become who you think you are.
And I think
the Buddhists, the old sages have been talking about this fact that we're not who we think we are, that we're not thinking for thousands of years. And it hasn't been lost on us because it can't be lost by us, this awareness. We can be lost in thought, thinking all we are is thinking, but we're not really lost. We're literally losing ourselves to justify there is nothing else to do but think about what we're thinking, which is insanity, just basically reinforcing itself. And that's exactly what insanity does. Insanity wants to make believe what isn't true is true. So if I'm doing that today with any thought that I'm maintaining, that I'm relying on as though it's real and true, and it's going to have some applicable purpose, I'm creating an environment of insanity. It may not create that critical mass that gets completely out of control where I have a meltdown. Think of this. In nuclear power, they control the fission, the fusion, the atoms as they're split to control the heat. But if they let it get up, if the critical mass becomes too critical and too massive, it melts the whole thing down. What do we talk about? We have meltdowns. In our experience, we have nervous breakdowns. Those are those exact same things that are happening at a nuclear level because we are part of the physics that makes up this experience. We're not apart from it. We're not some distinct, we don't need to understand it for it to be happening. We're absolutely intimately a part of it all right now without understanding any of it.
So I'm sorry, Jack, do you think that if we had this kind of thought, negative thought, coming from nowhere, so do you think that one key or a skill could be putting something positive in the brain, like
already there?
Oh, okay.
Negative and positive are intimately connected, like good and bad are intimately connected. That's what I was getting at earlier, that to have a thought as though it's alone is to think we can oppose all other thoughts. We can't. So the irony of it is, and generally reality is, in insanity, reality is ironic and paradoxical because it's completely backward from the insanity. If I think I can oppose all thoughts, when in fact by having a thought and thinking it's the only thought, I'm actually confirming that everyone else can have that same right to think what they want and have a thought that I don't have or don't think is right. If I'm willing to do that, I'm actually noticing that I am the creator of the fight. I am the creator of the wars. I am the one participating in having that even continue to perpetuate as a mythology amongst humans, rather than say, if I have the right, everyone else equally has the right to think whatever they want. And now I have no issue with what people think because I start letting them simply think what they want. And I know it isn't who they are. I know it's just simply something they're doing. Thinking goes from being this meteoric thing where I put my hands to my face and think all the world is a couple of hands over my eyes, to where I start saying, oh, it's just something we're doing. It's something we're doing. It's something we can all be doing. My sense is thoughts aren't coming from nowhere. we've been saying that so we could justify having nothing to do with them. Yet, if we're making thoughts up that we think are reality and they have no basis, they aren't anywhere even when we're thinking them, but in our thoughts. They have no life other than the maintenance we give them in our own thinking. And what are they there? Imagined. They're not real. They're not true. It's only what I think of them as reality and truth that gives me the idea that I am the maker of reality and truth, that I become only what I think. Immediately, I start to think all I am is what I think. I start to think I'm lost in thought. So what do? Think more about the thinking. I start to think I have no perspective, so I can only be what I think I am. So if I think I don't know something, I don't think I know it. And that's the end of it. It isn't. It's a self-concluding thought to help support the denial that denial is done, denying that I'm even doing what I'm doing. Reactive thoughts will always spawn reactive thoughts until I start noticing, oh, I'm creating reactive thoughts because they're defensive, because they're indefensible, which means they have to be defensive to be maintained. So what do? Maintain them, thinking it proves that I'm the creator of reality.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow. Wow. My brain, like,
Exactly. So now think of this. In an infinite space that has no bounds, nothing can exist. Talking about your nothingness. If something has no space, it doesn't operate in space. There's no room for something to actually exist. It gets so infinitely small because it has no basis other than what's conceived of. It's just a concept. So time is a concept of thought. It's not a concept of reality, because whenever time is considered, it's only considered in the present, where we are. And it isn't to say it doesn't have some usefulness any more than to say dimension, because time and dimension are the same thing. If you go somewhere, it always takes time. But if you're always in the present, there is no time in the process of getting there. So the one sort of negates the other, and nothing, all of a sudden, nothing becomes a big deal.
Yeah. So, Jack, what do you think we, as human beings, we suffer, but it's not real, apparently, right?
Well, it isn't real, and yet we try to manifest it in the physicality to prove it's real. So we're constantly trying to prove what we're thinking is real by hurting people and creating toxic waste. Literally, it's mental waste that we're creating by making believe that shit, which we talk about all the time. People say, I got to get my shit together. What is shit? It's a waste product. It means all of its value has been used. And what does the body do? A constipated body is not a healthy body. A constipated brain is not a healthy brain. When I think shit is my goal, I am using a waste product to make believe it's the source of my reality. And I'm constantly giving shit. We even call, when we go to the bathroom, we call it taking a shit. It's not taking a shit, it's actually giving a shit. We call giving a shit caring for somebody. How twisted that is within the same context of using the word shit. People say, I've got a lot of shit to do. And I'm like, why start? It's not going to smell any better if you get more of it done. But we're admitting openly that we know what we're doing has no useful purpose. We know what we're thinking has no useful purpose. If you begin listening, I've said in here before, and it sounds, when I say watch your words, it's not a censorship. It's just beginning to notice when you're watching your thoughts are going to convey into feelings, they're going to convey into words. If you watch your words, you'll start having, we think we don't have perspective when we're in our thoughts because we only think who we are is what we think, not realizing that our thoughts are spawning feelings, they're spawning words, they're attaching concepts to it, they're attaching stories to it. And if you start watching as the observer, the stories and the words you're using, you're going to see that you're saying things much more accurately than you've been thinking you were saying them because you've turned them into something they're not to continue to maintain that what you're doing isn't what you're doing, because it's insane to continue to do what we're doing when it has no basis other than our perpetuation and thinking. And we talk in terms that we say things that I mean, we'll listen today. And I've done a men's retreat annually, and generally speaking, it didn't happen this last time because I think I might have been a little clearer than normal. But this idea that we're always in the present, I normally do a 10-minute, 15-minute thing on the fact that we're always in the present. There is nothing that's happening anywhere that anything's happening but in the present. And if everything's in the present where everything's happening, then we have everything already in the present where we are, always have, always will, can't be anywhere else. It's always new, so it never gets old, so it's not in time or space. It's actually witnessing the infinite in the present, but we've diminished our capacity to admit it by depreciating the value of it and making believe that all we are is what we think about it. And so end up going in circles and circles with the thinking we're not present because our attention is being paid to something that isn't happening.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean we're not present. It means we're present. So normally after my 15-minute monologue, first person raises their hand almost inevitably and says, Anthony was at one of these when we first met. I really struggle with being in the present. After 15 minutes of saying, there is no other place we can be, it's where we always are. And yet the thinking about it is that our thinking is so dominant that we're not in the present when we're thinking about things that aren't happening. So even in that, we're admitting that we're thinking about things that aren't happening, but we're thinking about it as reality, so we think we're actually not in the present. Think of the impossibility of coming up with that rationalization to tell the story. If the present is all there is, there's no other place to be, literally, ever. There's no place to get. There's nothing more to have, nothing. It's all here. The abundance of that thinking begins to allow thinking to operate abundantly, because now we're actually channeling and expressing a reality that is real rather than one that is superficially imposed on our thinking.
So, Jack, why some of us, for some of us, it's difficult to live in right now, right here? Why is so hard for many human beings to focus?
Because you think you're not. You're addicted to your thinking, and you think your thinking is reality. And when you simply start, just like I just said, you're looping back onto this idea that it's hard. What's hard is trying not to be there because you're always there. What's hard is thinking you're not there because you're always there. Again, here's how the reality reveals itself when you're looking at what you're saying and thinking accurately, rather than using it as a justification to support the fact that it's difficult. The difficulty comes in constantly repeating what's not true, hoping it will be true, but it can't be true if truth is already true, because there is no lack in truth. There is no missing piece in truth. There is no mystery in truth. There is not something I need to think of to tell you the truth, because you already know the truth because you're a product of truth. So if you think I have something to offer you, I don't. All I'm doing is talking about it so we can, as a society, use one of the best, most advanced vehicles we have for communication and connection more effectively, and start to actually function on a basis of reality rather than supposed reality. Think of the word supposed. We're posing as the creators of reality. We're supposing what we should be doing rather than what we're doing. Doing everything to make believe and not notice its belief is unnecessary in reality and truth. Reality doesn't ask for belief. It doesn't ask for faith or trust or any of it, hope, none of it. It's real regardless of what we think. All of those things we've done to try to have faith in lies coming true, we've used unlimited faith and it's never worked. So we think a little bit of faith in something that will work is impossible, because it's never proven to be possible, because we've had faith in faithless things. To start having faith in something that's absolutely faithful, all you need to do is a second and you go, oh, and start laughing at the absurdity of making believe that somehow or another this wasn't true when what you were thinking was all that was true. Why? Because when you're part of it all. You've already got it. You already know better. Intuition is defined as knowledge beyond reason. It means there's no reason, no understanding, no thinking at all. You just know you know. And when you know what you do? Act on that knowledge, just like atoms and molecules and everything in the universe is doing right now. They're all just doing exactly what they're designed to do because they're acting on the knowing nature of what they are. Cells, whatever they are, subatomic level, general theory of relativity, all of the different elements that we've divided into these words that we use are all happening synchronously, simultaneously, absolutely right now. For everyone. Yes.
I love when you say that we have everything. We have love. We have creativity. We it's like we have everything, and that is good start. For somebody who has no hope, and you say, you have hope, you have love, you just give it. And I think that is the purpose. This is my personal belief. That is the purpose of being a human being. Because if I have love, it's for the people around me. And yeah, it's so amazing. I love it.
Well, consider that it isn't what we do, it's already what we have. And it's what we were already sharing. We don't even need to give it away to have everybody have it when we start thinking about this accurately. But to think about that abundance and start to think of it as being true, you begin to realize even the inspiration you just shared isn't coming because you're overthinking about what's wrong. You're simply contemplating and meditating on the fact that it's right, and start to say, oh, wow, the abundance is already abundant. All we've been doing is trying to prove it wasn't abundant by making believe the proof of scarcity proved our thoughts were real, so we could say, see, I told you this would never work. See, I told you they'd do that. See, I told you. We want to prove we're right only for one reason. We're only righteous because we're not right. We only fight for that claim because we know we're wrong. Again, if you think of hopelessness as an accurate assessment of thoughts that have no hope, rather than think of it as a dilemma that we're stuck with and pining over and need to get out of, you're giving it a reality to have that consequence become hopeless, rather than realize that hopelessness is actually an accurate assessment of something that has absolutely no hope, just like what that thought was in the nothingness before you created it. It isn't anything. All it is what we're thinking about it. So you see the clarity now. All of a sudden, hopelessness becomes a great guidance system to say, if I'm feeling hopeless, I'm probably thinking about something that's absolutely hopeless. I'm hearing my thoughts. The immediacy of my experience is actually witnessing my brain working and actually starting to see that I have this system, this bodily system that is so well tuned that it's been giving me the right information all along, but I've been thinking about it sickly. So I've taken it as something to try to get over and feel better than, because I give it credit for existing as reality rather than, in fact, a simple supposition of thought, presuming itself to be real. Presuming itself to be. That's something I'm doing, something I'm choosing. It's like a guy who gets in an airplane for the first time and just starts flipping switches when he gets into the air and think, I know what I'm doing because I'm doing what I'm doing. The plane is probably going to crash. We've been crashing long enough as a species. It might be worth admitting. It might be worth talking about. Just a guess on my part. I know the value I get. And the difference in my conversation has developed enormously from what I used to say and what I used to think, because I used to think sickly and then come up with all sorts of stories to justify it and try to excuse myself. And I finally realized I was trying to excuse myself from the table of life rather than eat the bounty that's been provided and start to share in that bounty and start to participate in that bounty, because it finally occurred to me, I've never been apart from it. I've just been thinking things that I was apart from. I've been thinking thoughts that are apart because they have no basis, they have no substance, they have no denominator, they have no reality, nothing. It's all fantasy imagined to be real. Perfect definition of insanity.
Wow.
So let me ask you this then, Jack. Thanks for explaining that. Do you think that there's something bigger than the universe?
God.
Well, if the universe is constantly expanding, there must be. So that's another thing, Lindsay. Think of this. We tend to think about forever as being that we want to live forever, we want to go forever. Forever never happens. You know why? Because you can wait forever, and you know how long you have to wait?
Thousands of years.
Forever. You still have forever to wait. So in transferring thinking to an ever-present infinite moment, there is no forever in it. There's only immediacy, spontaneity, actuality, reality, truth, present, now. The gift, think of a present, it's a gift.
Yeah.
The presence we have is our gift. Sharing our presence is the gift, not sharing a diminished capacity of what we think we are, what we think we should be, what we think we might be, what we think we should have been, what we wished we were. None of that is part of that. It's already here. It isn't to say we can't have those thoughts or shouldn't have those thoughts. But when we have those thoughts, when we're doing what we're doing and thinking we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, think of the conflict that is imposed on our own thinking And then think of why we even think it's a mystery that it's happening while we're the ones that did both. We had the thought and thought we shouldn't have it. We're the creators of that seeming mystery. The mystery is, why are we not admitting what we're doing?
Yeah, because that is why we need to learn to that word, optimize our days, because thinking about 7 years, 10 years from now is like, we don't know, right? We need to optimize our days or month, but with a present, right?
Well, it's already optimized by being fully everything that it is. When we start thinking accurately, we know what to do rather than spend a lot of time thinking of what we should be thinking about, what we're not doing or shouldn't be doing or hoped we were doing or wished we'd done, or all that stuff just goes away. So what we start doing is what we're doing. And when we're where we are, we realize this moment is the sum total of everything I've ever done, but it's also the sum total of everything that's ever been done, including everyone who's ever had any thoughts. Everything always now in the present. So this is, the past is in the present, the future is in the present. We bore a hole in the future by making believe our present isn't present. And we wonder why we keep ending up feeling like we don't belong anywhere, because we're constantly reinforcing this concept that isn't true.
Yeah, this is
Getting back to the shit thing, think of the term holy shit. It's actually giving divinity to the ego. It's making the ego become our God. Most gods that are created are thought of as human. The Bible says we were made in the image and likeness of God. And I'm not promoting the Bible. I think it's a pretty interesting book. I think it has a lot to say, but I also think a lot of human hands were on it at different times trying to say things that they wanted to have say. But it says we're created in the image and likeness of God. Does that mean now we are the creators of God's image by making believe God is a human? And God seems to have all the characteristics within the confines of what humans have done to think of God as being vengeful, hateful, spiteful, contemptful, angry, hostile, something to fear. Those are all definitions of an egoistic, narcissistic, self-centered person. And when we don't think it's who we are, what do? Blame God. That's a pretty big leap to impose all the characteristics that we're exhibiting in our own experience and denying on an absolute supreme power. While we're calling it infinite, we're claiming that it needs to subject itself to this because it must be very offended by us. It must be very defensive. It must be very reactive. It must be all of the things we're doing, we're not admitting we're doing. And all of a sudden we think that's who God is. That is ego prancing as God, because it's all based in thought.
But the truth is, we're an aspect of God. We're not created in his image. We're all part of it.
But the image is that there's no image. It's an it's an absolute state of present being, and something that is indivisible seems to be invisible to us.
That's me.
It seems to be. Think of the substance that runs our body. Very few of us ever see our guts or the blood that flows through our body to give it the potential to even have an appearance. Superficiality in creating what we think is reality is seeing appearance as being substance. It's also thinking of the effect as being the cause. It's reversed everything because we're making believe we're the creators of reality and truth, and we end up thinking of reality and truth backward. That's what addiction is. Thinking all we can do is the worst thing. Think of how narrow the thinking has to be to come to the conclusion that the only thing we can do, the only thing we need to do, the only thing we want to do is the one thing we know is killing us. It's pretty convenient to think that when we're trying to put ourselves out of the misery, we continue to insist on creating.
Yeah.
That insistence to be resistant to what's happening is what creates the persistence of seeming never-ending problems. We create them that way so we can say it's impossible. I can't do anything about it. I'm just a lowly, people say I'm only human, and I say, no, you're not quite just only human. If you had no spirit, you would be a body, you would be a corpse.
Wow. I'm so thankful for this class. To me, it's a class. It's so powerful. Oh my
Well,
God.
you're talking now about real power. You're actually witnessing the essence of what, and this, what's interesting about this power, and we call it a force, it doesn't force anything. Those are words we've used for this alleged power so long, but this power doesn't have, if it's love, it doesn't force anyone to do anything, which is why we're free to do everything we want, including act insanely as we have, and do the things that are horrendous within the human population, within the planetary population of animals and species and insects and whatever we've done that's corrupt are all reflections because we've been given the freedom to think what we want by a loving source, which gives us the absolute right to be wrong anytime we want. And to think that wrong is right sets us on a course that seems to be in collision with reality, but it isn't. It doesn't affect reality at all. At all. What it affects is our experience. And what it affects is it's kind of like if you're playing poker and somebody at the table just keeps throwing their hands into all the chips and mixing them all up and all the cards. You can't play the game. The game of life becomes impossible. It's no longer a game.
Wow, the game of life. I call it like that way. See, mi amor, remember the game of life?
Yeah.
Yes, the game of life. Life is a game. And we need to learn the skills to win in this
Well,
planet.
we're already winning. We've already won. We
Yes.
all got the lottery. If you think the lottery is rare, the chance that you're here is as many times the amount, the lottery is like 100 million to 1. The chance that you're here, given the combination of potential between all the sperm and the ova and all the different variations, is so slim as to be impossible for you to even exist within the confines of current thought.
Wow.
I mean, there's
And
only
we
eight
got
and a
to
half.
enjoy
There's
Van
only eight
Halen
and a half
here.
billion people. That's nothing compared to the amount of eggs that have been hatched, the amount of sperm that has been, in every ejaculation. I forget what the number is, but it's a huge number of variations that can occur. And yet it's you, and you're here. And that was part of Gabe's and our conversation yesterday. If we can even consider that we shouldn't exist, like have suicidal thoughts, we're confirming we exist to even have those thoughts. And yet we think the thinking is so imperative that the only thing we can do is act on the sick thinking to kill ourselves. Think of that last act of self-control, trying to prove the self is in control, but it's trying to prove a self that doesn't exist is in control by killing the body that's created the self within the confines of the thinking. We talk about suicide in one way, the numbers. We talk about overdoses in one way, the numbers. We do not talk about the root of the problem honestly and openly in society. And as a result, the problem continues. The problem grows. We know the problem's growing. And if a problem grew at a hospital, somebody would have to at some point say, the diagnosis could be wrong here. Maybe we made a wrong presumption. If a doctor did this, he'd have his license removed and be thrown in prison. And yet the policymakers are doing this, watching people die, and nobody's held accountable because we think it's an impossibility. Because the thinking we're doing about it is impossible, not because it's impossible.
Yeah, that statement is a fact. Yes, it's yep. Yeah.
So now think of inspiration. If there's any healing possible, it's in the presence of actually beginning to admit we're present and starting to diffuse and dissolve. We're literally dissolving what we thought were solutions and also dissolving the maintenance of the problems because there's no solution in them because there's actually no problem in them. The problem is maintaining that there's a problem to solve. And because the problem that's created doesn't exist, what kind of solution are we ever going to come to that exists? But resolutions that are constantly resolute on every major social change in this country, we call a war. The war on poverty, the war on drugs, the war. We're losing all those wars because we're thinking of it as a fight rather than a reckoning, an honest reckoning with how things are. And starting to talk openly as a society of people. If we're democratic, it certainly would involve the honesty of the individuals making up that democracy to give the buoyancy and the freedom to the actual people within that concept, rather than the idea that we keep everything to ourselves and hope somebody somewhere else in the country's going to fix it while we're watching them create the same kind of logjam that we have in our own thinking. When I have a thought and think I shouldn't be thinking about it, that sounds a lot like Congress and the Senate right now, doesn't it?
Mm.
Sounds a lot like the politics where it's so close that there's nowhere to go. You can't make any decisions. Every decision you make creates an opposition to the same thing. It's exactly what we do in our own experience. When we think who we are is what we think, every thought we have is opposed by another thought that just opposes it.
Mm-hmm.
That's an impossible way to live happily and useful and holy.
Yeah. Do you think in your experience that personal development is one thing that we can save that world to this craziness? Personal development. So
well, it's if I think the person I am is the one I think I am, I'm trying to develop a persona, which is basically projecting an image of who I think I am so that people buy the image rather than recognize the substance that we already share in whole, in total. So characteristics are things we choose. They're not who I'm not. I certainly have certain traits in my body, but it's how I choose to express them that creates the characteristics that I'm seen to have. It doesn't mean that's who I am. That means that's just what I choose to think and do. I could wear all white all the time. I don't have no trait in my DNA subjects me to wearing what I wear. My choices do, how I look and how I appear. So persona is an image. Characteristics are choices. They're not reality. My personality is developed. If I'm developing it based on a self I think I am, then the person I think I am is a fraud. And I take very seriously people who don't think like I am, so I'm offended by them because that fraud has to be defended constantly to be maintained in thought. If it has no basis in reality and I'm taking it seriously enough to be real, I need to fight for it all the time and defend it. And it's exactly what's going on the macrocosmic level of society, or the macro level, the broadest level. So what happens for us individually, since we're a part of it all, happens for all of us. What everybody is doing is what we're struggling with, not what we're doing alone. Because we're part of the total of all that experience. And it's not just everybody, it's everything that's happening too. Everything, constantly. So personal development is beginning to see that we have an absolute state of knowing that is readily aware, always available, and intuitive because it's beyond reason and beyond understanding and beyond thinking. But what does that do to thinking? Allows thinking to finally begin to express reality and truth, which would be to express lovingness. And I don't mean being syrupy, loving, caring for people that are doing things wrong, but saying to people doing things wrong, you might be more than you think you are. When I look at what you're doing, it tells me you're not very much to be doing that sort of thing, and talk honestly to people. I do not need to be right to be honest about what I'm thinking. So the best chance I have to correct my thinking is to say what I think and see how it looks in the open air and what the impact is, and adjust and learn in terms of personal development. It's the thinking I'm developing in relation to the thinking I'm having about everyone else, that if it's wrong, I'm never going to develop it in any right way. I'm always going to reinforce the wrong if I don't notice it and adjust accordingly and grow from it.
Wow.
So if the basis of my thinking is wrong, everything I'm thinking about everyone I'm thinking about is wrong.
Exactly.
So how well am I able to express love? I'm actually condemning them all to my thinking who I am is what they should be thinking about.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Crazy. Yeah. It's like, oh my God. Yeah. Wow.
So this is why emotional sobriety is starting to see that sobriety from if anyone out there is addicted to a substance of some sort, the mental addiction is an addiction to a lack of substance. So the substance we're trying to use in unlimited quantities is trying to fill the lack of substance we have in our thinking when we make believe that a lie is true. It has no basis in reality at all. It's only thought. Thoughts are the only place lies exist. They don't exist in the universe. It's the only place ego exists. It doesn't exist in the universe. It's the only place time and space exist. They're concepts of thought. The universe never felt as though it needed a facelift. It's getting old. It's just done what it's done, as it's done what it's done, for as long as it's done what it's done in the present, without any thinking whatsoever, because it knows.
And still getting bigger.
Knows what to do. Well, and I would say, Anthony, that our idea of bigger and smaller is probably skewed because we think of it in very narrow terms, rather than see that if the universe is expanding, it's expanding into an already existing space that isn't expanding.
Yeah.
It's just part of, I mean, maybe space is created by the expansion of space. I don't know. Maybe that's part of it.
We got a new theory.
Let me ask this. If there's no place for it to go, how would it be expanding? There must be some present state of beingness that allows it to go where it's going, to seem infinite, so that we can have some metaphoric experience within our universe is tiny compared to what we're talking about in terms of infinite. So tiny, as I said earlier, that in an infinite space, it can't even exist. So it may also just be a concept of thought, consciousness. If that's the case, and that knowing consciousness is the nature of nature, we already know what's happening. We've just been discounting it because we wanted to take credit for being the creator of it. We don't want to say thanks. We don't want to be grateful. We want to take credit. And we're pissed off that we can't get credit for it. So we look to get credit from everything by saying it's a new discovery. We discovered cell phones. That's not a new discovery. The cell phone, the microwaves that cell phones work off of have been in the universe since the beginning, 14 billion years. It's just we transform reality. We don't create reality. We take existing reality and turn it into things that we can utilize. And if the thinking's sick, there's a good chance the things we're creating that seem very convenient are also coming with toxic consequences that we haven't yet reckoned with.
So we have a power to create whatever we want because it's in the universe.
It's already created. It's already there. Yes.
Yeah. If something negative, we can just take all the positive from the universe and just make it.
Well, so let me talk about that for a minute, because that's a great point, Lenses.
Yeah.
We've been manifesting the whole time. We just haven't wanted to admit we were manifesting what we were so sick of doing. We've actually, if we can manifest the opinion that we have nothing to do with what's going on, then we've been doing what we're capable of doing the whole time. We've been manifesting answers to our prayers by having things go wrong to claim we have control over things. If we disband the sickness of that, manifestation is a natural consequence of thinking, because we never make choices that don't come with a want or desire.
Oh, that's kind of it. That should be all of it, right?
Well, it starts to give credit for choices being prayers. They're all prayers. We want something. We're not making choices because even if we want something less of something, we want that thing to be less than or not exist. We want our problems to go away, and we want them to be replaced with things we don't think are problems. If the problem is the thinking we're doing, we're going to continue to create the problems to give us perspective and a mirror that we're standing in front of the mirror, and we're creating the problem. So manifestation, we've been manifesting it all along. We've just been embarrassed to admit that what we manifest was a mess. And it stinks, by the way, because it's shitty.
And going back to the universe, before the Wright brothers invented flight, did it exist before that one moment?
It was still possible. Birds were flying. Dinosaurs were flying at one point, apparently.
Once they flew the first plane, did that change what was really there all the time?
No, it translated it.
Yeah.
Expressed it.
And then also, it was interesting to see how when you gave the analogy of the car and the check engine lights, and you were talking about it, Lindsay took it as pay attention very carefully to all the signs and think a lot, rather than what I think you really meant is if it says check engine light and you keep driving, that doesn't mean you can't keep driving on that light, right? Not so much to just see what's everything's going.
You can. You drive on that light all the time, Anthony.
But I mean, it's not good to do that.
Well, exactly. The insanity is thinking that what's wrong will be right the more we do it.
Right.
That if I just keep thinking the thought that's wrong and feel like hell, I'm going to get better and I'm going to end up living in some panacea that always seems to be somewhere else at some other time, but never now.
Right.
And that's
So
just
not so much think
that's
about it and look at all
delusion.
the lights. Not so
Well,
much check
delusion.
not so much check every light and to make
No,
sure
no,
what
no.
everybody's
Our
doing.
signals, Anthony, in our body, that body language is giving us information all the time. We are choosing to ignore it because we think ignoring it is brilliant when ignoring it is ignorant. And we think ignoring it doesn't have a consequence because we can deny it. But the consequence of denial is insensitivity, meaning we become numb to what's actually happening. What does that mean? We're not sensible because we
Right.
become insensitive to what's actually happening. Sensitivity is our awareness. Our body has senses, so we can be aware of what's happening. And our senses aren't limited to 5 senses. We've got many more than that.
Yeah. And the story where you said it when you were speaking, the person came up to you after the meeting and said, I really don't judge anymore. I used to judge things all the time and I don't judge anything anymore. And to that you said, well, how would you know that unless you're judging yourself?
Or judging your thoughts.
Yeah.
Brains are designed to judge. Brains are going to do what brains do. You know why? Because that's what they're designed to do. And
Right.
for us to think that we can dominate them is again the claim that we're dominating reality too. It isn't true. When we let our brains do what they're doing, they don't do it with stress and great conflict. They do it with ease because we're designed to express what's known rather than only what we think is known. If all we think is what we think is known, that isn't knowledge, that's thinking. Thinking is generally limited to our experience. Our experience isn't the infinite nature of things because we haven't even admitted for the most part that there's an infinite experience to even experience, or an infinite nature to experience. We haven't really admitted that that's actually our nature. How is it that our thinking would be aligned with it if we haven't talked about it openly and begin to consider that something that's almost so profound that we can't even discuss is the nature of our nature? But we can say that the infinite, however we define it, and whatever we define is going to be wrong because it can't be definitive because it's absolute and completely beyond the bounds of words. But we can refer to it and we can know that our reference to it isn't the definition of it. It's just a finger pointing to the totality of everything out there. Just a suggestion that we consider it. That contemplative aspect of our knowing is that thing. We don't think it's that thing because we don't see it, we can't smell it, we can't taste it, and we don't touch it. But in fact, we do all those things with it in our knowing because it's the sum total of everything we're capable of doing. The division has no part. If there's something to divide, it means it's part of the whole. Something that's indivisible, if you split something in half that's infinite, you have the whole. Once again, like to Gabe's point earlier. The opposite in the infinite is the same. So to oppose the infinite is actually to confirm it, which is why it's impossible to do what we keep doing because we're creating the impossibility to try to prove that it's real and true, when in fact, if you simply look at it and say, if it's impossible, I'll just consider it's impossible because I've started to actually admit that reality must be real and truth must be true and what's infinite must be infinite, just because there's nothing else it could be than what it is.
And nature is perfect.
Well, perfection is always thought of as a standard. Think of this.
Yeah.
We think of perfection only the way we think something should be, which is an admission that we don't should be what it is. That's why it seems imperfect.
Yes.
Perfection is a function of comparing things. If you compare something to something that isn't the same as the thing, you're going to find things more or less than the thing you're comparing it to. It's going to seem imperfect. But if you consider that it is what it is, as it is, it's perfect, whatever it is. This stapler, it's what it is, as it is right now. It's perfect. You may have another one you like better. It doesn't make this imperfect. It makes your thinking about it seem as though your ideas about it are better. And once again, it confirms you think what you're thinking is truth and reality because you want to prove that what you think about staplers is right and real. It's just a stapler doing, it doesn't even have to be working for it to be what it is right now, as it is. Because you know what? Everything right now, everywhere that anything is is happening right now as it is, not as we think of it. So if we could be assured with that, it doesn't take much thinking to do. What do we have to think about now? Now we know everything about everything.
I like
In a
when
sentence.
we first met, Jack, and you said that one of the guys you were working with, after a while, you asked him, "What's going on?" And he said, "Apparently everything." What's going on? Apparently everything.
No, that's Hawkins, and Hawkins reads a lot, and he's been kind of fascinated and really come out of his shell in the time we've spent together. And he's a maniac in so many ways, but he's turning that mania into creativity and affecting people's lives in ways that are very, very productive. And he's very excited and enthusiastic about it. So he just graduated with his MBA from USC recently, and he was a standout in his class because he just came up with ideas and just went for them.
Stephen Hawking
was inspired about, right? In his thinking, and he expresses it.
Stephen Hawking?
No, his name's Hawkins. Hawkins the third. So the culmination of inspiration is basically love. It's in spirit. It's beginning to see that we already are there. If we already are there and that's who we are, we don't have to debate what we think we are. We don't have to debate who we think we should be. We don't have to come up with new ways of acting, and just do what we're doing. And if we're doing what we're doing and see it's what we're doing, and then respond to it in ways where I think, well, I could probably be better at expressing what I just expressed. And yet not say I shouldn't have done what I did, but say thank you for having done what you did to give me the insight of what I could do better. Begin to adjust, like a sailor adjusting to the weather, regardless of the weather report. If he doesn't adjust to the conditions that happen, he's going to not get to port. The weather report isn't going to get him into the port. The adjustment, this is basically mental yoga. It's basically what yoga is designed to do for the body that's been under so much stress that it needs to be relieved of the stress by stretching all the time. And all we're doing is starting to stretch the bounds of the limited thinking we're doing to begin to see that there are no limits to it, except the ones we impose on it and make believe are true and real. That's it. We're perfectly capable of having limited thoughts, just like we're perfectly capable of having a car with less than a full tank of gas and getting in it to drive it. We're capable of doing that, but we're also capable of making believe it's all there is by making believe that it's true. And all of a sudden we're defending limits as reality, which if reality is real and it's infinite, there are no limits whatsoever. So it's a false presumption. It's a false seeming self, promoting the ideas, trying to make believe that we're going to get better, being better at getting worse. That's crazy. And I've been crazy long enough to want to talk about it because I feel better about sanity than the insanity. And also the freedom. I mean, one of the beauties of this too is to begin to realize that most of what the arts are creating things that wouldn't exist without the artist. It's beginning to play in the environment of fantasy and play in the environment of imagination by expressing things that stimulate inspiration on us, because this capacity that we have considered to be a liability, we've turned into a liability, is one of our greatest assets, perhaps our greatest assets, to imagine. And if the imagination we're doing is simply a contemplation of what's happening right now, and what's actually happening is everything that's happening everywhere anything's happening, including everything that's happening that we don't think is happening, we're starting to invest our thinking in something so broad and huge that thinking becomes what it is as it is, rather than becoming the creator of all that, simply the contemplator of those things. And our thinking will know what to do very clearly when we stop making believe and imposing on it that it should only be doing what turns what we think into reality and truth.
What's going on? Apparently everything.
Everything. Yeah. So in that infinite state, we've always been there. And if we can be so delusional as to think we're not, there's probably a process we might go through in reckoning with the issues that we've been dealing with that may not feel comfortable, may not feel right, may not feel safe, because we're starting to face the fears we've created and embedded into our bodily systems that's been absorbing through the tension those experiences. And it will start to let those things go naturally and start to decompress rather than constantly recompress, and concentrate this focus trying to make a point that can't be made. If something shrinks, it can only shrink so far before it can't shrink anymore. If something expands, it can expand forever if there's an infinite space to expand into. And I would say that's probably what our universe is doing. It's giving us a metaphor for reality. That's its language to explain to us where we are, how we are, as we are. And it's surrounding us in everything that's happening. It's all there, all the signs. Rather than create the signs that we think are stop signs and limitation signs and yield signs and merging signs, but to start to see that the signs are all pointing to an absolute nature, is to start to sit a little quieter for a minute longer than we might normally when it comes to reacting to something, and start to give a little bit of that pause and see that that is in fact a contemplative meditation, not when we're sitting quietly next to a babbling brook for 20 minutes because we're creating an environment that's peaceful and feeling peace, but because we're starting to notice that peace is our nature regardless of the hailstorm of circumstances that seem to be competing for our attention and in conflict, because you just start realizing this is just how things happen. They go through a process of change constantly, but the fact that they're always changing never changes. So here's the absolute in the face of what we think is constantly changing. Start seeing it as the total of everything. It's just changing. We're in this dynamic in a body, whatever this is, whether it's a concept, whether it's real, I don't know. I know, I don't know how to speak to it in ways that I think are accurate enough to make that claim. But I know whatever it is, it is. And I know whatever is happening is happening. And I know that if I'm a part of it, so are you. And so are we. And that we can't be apart from what we're a part of. We can express ourselves differently and still be the same part of the whole. And we can give each other the freedom to have that same right, because we have that right. We wouldn't be able to think for ourselves, per se, if we didn't have that right. We have that right. It's inclusive to begin to recognize that everything that's everything is already included in everything. It's not up to us to make that decision. So to think it isn't is to create conflict where it's otherwise doesn't exist.
Mm.
And it starts to reveal love as this indivisible, ever-present state of giving and generosity and support. It doesn't demand we stop doing anything. It doesn't hold us accountable. We're already accountable for what we do. The accountability is recognized, the reckoning of what we wear. The anxiety is an accountability aspect. It's telling us you're doing something wrong. You're creating weight. Why wouldn't creating weight lead to depression? If we're creating it and it's delusional, all it takes is beginning to realize that it has no basis in reality, to begin to actually pop the bubbles and see that they vanish before you could even think about it, because you realize it's your thinking that's been maintaining it, not reality at all. Boom. All of a sudden, your thoughts will get healthier quickly because our nature is healthy. Our nature is not diseased. Health and healing isn't a miracle. The miracle is that we've been thinking disease is normal. That's the miracle. We turned it all backward. Anyway, that's about our 2 hours. Lindsay, I'm very happy to have you here. I love watching your face light up.
It's my pleasure. And thank you.
Mine too.
For this invitation. I'm happy because I love to learn, and I love to, yes, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, your awareness is very helpful, because when those little breakthroughs, when you begin to realize that there is no breakthrough because there is no cloud and there is no limit, it all of a sudden, it's laughable that we took this seeming self so seriously as to think we should kill ourselves or live any less than we actually are. It's all been an insane idea that's just gotten completely out of control. And the conformity we've created to make believe that it's because everybody else is doing it, it's the only thing we can do, isn't true at all, because we can speak honestly anytime we choose to. And that's what this whole process has been designed to do. I don't know that I always speak honestly. I speak honestly to what I'm thinking at any given moment. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it real. But if it aligns with reality in some way, simply contemplating it will waken up, make us realize that we're awake to it, because the darkness can never, ever fight light, ever. So it's always the enlightenment. You begin to realize that there's Jack Kerouac said, which I've repeated here many times, that the enlightened person knows they've always been enlightened.
Mhm.
And we've just been stuck in a loop of thinking that we thought we were stuck in so that we could support the contention that we couldn't get out.
I like, and I'm happy because in this meeting, because you talk about moral, you talk about honest, right conduct, acting in accordance with principles. You talk about all those values, and to me, that means a lot because
Yes.
well,
It's everything. The universe is based on principles, absolute principles, not doubting uncertain principles, not ones that are thought of to be existing, but ones that actually exist. So as everything that's existing can exist right now, including us to even think of this and talk about this. When I was a kid, people used to say the moral of the story is, and they'd tell you what the story was designed to do. Today, people don't talk about the moral of the story. They talk about the immorality of repeating the story and claiming that if you repeat it enough, it becomes true. That's just a further slide in the direction of insanity, which is just a presumption of thought. That's all that it is. It's no more than that. Seeing and hearing things that don't exist, think of that, to the point earlier of the nothingness. If we're seeing and hearing things that don't exist and we're talking to ourselves, we're talking to something that doesn't exist rather than admit what we're talking to is our thinking, and we're really just thinking about our thinking. Contemplation is a huge advantage for us. Again, we've turned imagination into a liability, and we've turned contemplation into a liability by making believe it's true. It isn't a liability, it's an asset. The sickness says it's a liability because if insanity is seeing and hearing things that don't exist, they don't exist. To think of insanity as real is to think of it as existing, when in fact it's simply a condition we can create by making believe what we think is true. That's it.
wow.
And if you listen to people who say they're insane, which I've listened to plenty of them, they're generally not talking out loud about something they're happy about. They're angry. They're fearful. They're fighting something. You can hear it.
Yeah.
Hear
Mhm.
it. They are not made better by us in our claiming normal way, continuing to perpetuate the same thinking while we act normal and look normal because we do the things that are functional they can't do. It's the same thing between us. If any of us are doing it, it's the same thing we're doing. To think of us as distinct from them is to condemn them to the distinction we've created. That's it. It's not impossible to help people heal because effectively it's only the possibility of us thinking that it's impossible to help them heal that we've helped ourselves to an idea that's impossible. Not them, it's not their condition, it's our own impossibility we're creating to imagine it's impossible for them. If it's possible for any of us, it's possible for all of us. And I assure you, as people get better, other people get better naturally because it's kind of like a sinking boat. If you can slow the leak, the boat will last a little bit longer. If you can take a boat at the bottom of the ocean and raise it to the surface, that's what we're talking about doing, is starting to actually notice that if we raise the boat, everybody goes and climbs with us. We start to actually elevate everyone simply through the action of talking honestly. And this discussion, my contention is that it's not the 2 hours we spend together, it's the 166 hours, which I believe is the rest of a week, that we begin to engage with people on a level that we begin to give them an awareness of our awareness that we know they're intact, and then ask them if there's anything we can do to help them begin to express the responsibility rather than condemn them to making believe we need to do it for them and help them get better at thinking they don't need to do anything at all. It's the volition of the thought we have that we're doing it to start saying it's me doing this, the me I think I am doing this. Not reality choosing it for me, because reality doesn't have any choice in it. It's an absolute state of being that isn't an option. It isn't a negotiation. It's a state of being that we absolutely have. To start communicating on that level is to start to actually confirm. You start seeing clearly when you attempt at all to be honest about what you're thinking, including things that are wrong. Don't worry. You can be honest about what you're thinking, and what you're thinking is still wrong, but it gives a sense of freedom to letting it out into the open air, because you'll see that words just vanish as quickly as thoughts can vanish. Because once they're in air, they never have to be repeated. They never have to be said again. They're never going to repeat themselves. gives us a sense of freedom to know that we don't have to keep it to ourselves, sit by ourselves, feel alone, feel separated, feel isolated, feel abandoned. Those are all consequences of thoughts that have no basis in reality, so they have no place to be. You can't, to even think that they're lost or to think that they're abandoned is to give them credit as having somehow fit, sometime fit. They don't have that. We think of it in terms that are twisted because we've been thinking it so long, we think it must be real. It isn't. Reality's always been real regardless of what we thought, and it always will be. And it is now. Love you guys. Thanks for participating. I appreciate where we're going together in this, and it sounds like we've begun to cover some ground collectively that has been reinforcing the broader sense rather than the stories we tell about the problems we're having, trying to figure out how to get out of them by starting to see that we're not actually in them. We're certainly not in them now, except to the degree that we make believe we are. And to talk in those terms, to me, is very revealing and very enlightening, and is probably good food for thought for other people to hear.
What happened in 10th grade that you weren't the class clown anymore?
What's that?
What happened in 10th grade that you weren't the class clown anymore? You said to Anthony earlier, I was the class clown up until 10th grade.
I stopped going to school.
Oh, that's what I thought. Okay. Aloha.
Not completely.
Thank you, guys.
But we
Love
checked
you.
out. Love you guys. Thanks very much.
Hey, Jack. Do you have 1 minute off record?
Sure. Hang tight. Thanks all for listening. And again, contemplate, consider, simply live with the thoughts and see reality already fits. So if you're thinking in any relation to it, you're going to find that it's already fitting. But the difference is the fitting is going to become part of your thinking process rather than something you think you need to conclude. It will start to happen automatically. And there's an ease to it that will put you at ease compared to the dis-ease that's created by thinking about constantly fighting for this other direction that has been so endemic. And it's really the greatest pandemic humans have ever experienced. So anyway, I'm going to talk to Anthony offline here, off record. Do you still swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, Anthony?